Unfortunately, when they're struggling with some kind of issue, whether it's physical or psychological, they feel very anxious that they're the only one who has it, or if someone else finds out, they'll be regarded as inferior in some way. As musicians hide their injuries, not just from their other musicians, but often they don't go and seek help, like from a medical
Right.
person. Some of that's been our fault, like some of it's been a fault of health professionals not standing in the musician's shoes enough. I think it's really important for me as a physiotherapist to really understand what the musician needs. One of the things we found is that musicians play too dehydrated. Why are people playing dehydrated? And a lot of it's due to rehearsal structure. I'm quite frustrated by this. When you have mental skills, it's like a whole bunch of cards in your pocket so that
Absolutely.
if life throws something at you, you've got another card to pull out and you can adapt. All sorts of things can give a perception of pain. It doesn't mean that you don't have a real injury, and I think that's got to be clear. It's just that many things can lead to pain, like fear of pain makes pain worse. I think there's a fear that if you stop, if I don't practice today, I'll fall behind, but you can actually really set yourself back because you didn't let these relatively minor strains heal. Musicians hate this term, and I get it. There's nothing mechanistic about playing an instrument, but basically what it means is that if you have more control and more strength, then you don't have to work as hard when you play.
Hey, welcome back to the show, everybody. Welcome back to Trust the Process. This is the official podcast of Musician Unchained, the newest coaching program for musicians going through injury. I'm so excited to introduce today's guest today because she is somebody who is currently helping me through my current phase of my injury. She hails from Sydney, Australia, and is one of the foremost authorities in musicians' health, anatomy, physiology, the whole 9 yards, and also teaches at the University of Sydney and does extensive work with the Sydney Symphony. And her work and her reputation precedes her. So I'll just let her start talking. But thank you for being here, Dr. Bronwen Ackermann.
No problem. It's a pleasure, Clark.
We were just talking before we hit record, but while I was doing some research that, getting ready for the interview, you were interviewed by one of our mutual friends and colleagues, Frankie Losurdo, and he had mentioned in passing that you had gone through an injury as a clarinetist yourself. I'm curious on how that experience, if at all, influenced like how your career as an anatomist and physiologist or physiotherapist, if that influenced it at all.
Yeah, I think it was probably an influence that I wasn't so acutely aware of at the time. When I was about 14, 15, something like this, I was madly trying to get better at playing the clarinet. I'd studied guitar beforehand, and it's a very antisocial instrument when you're at school and you want to be in a band like
True.
everyone else. I mean, it's fine for school retreats and around campfires and things, but not so much for, um, the socializing. And played classical guitar too, which is even more antisocial, but in my stage of things. So I was madly trying to learn clarinet, and I had this really weird coincidental experience, just something that happens in life, that I was at a school, and they said, "Oh, can you blow up these balloons for a function?" So I spent an hour blowing up balloons, and then I thought I'd better go and practice before my lesson. And during my clarinet practice, something made this really kind of pop in the back of my nose. Like, it was the most bizarre thing. I thought, what on earth is that? Then I tried to keep playing, but air started coming out my nose. And I just went to my lesson and said to my teacher, I don't know what's happened. I heard this pop, now air's coming out my nose. And he was going, "Oh, don't be ridiculous. You just haven't practiced enough." And I'm like, well, maybe. but really the hair's coming up my nose when I'm playing. So I went to see my doctor and I showed him and he laughed and said, "Well, time to give up the clarinet pen." And that was really all I knew about it. And since then, never could blow up balloons or anything really, like always using balloon pumps or those air mattresses and things like this. Always had to use a pump. And it was only really once I got into performing arts medicine that I found out what it was. But I worked in a very high level sports clinic and quite early in my career. And we had quite a lot of performing artists coming there because um, they hoped that we would apply this same way of thinking from sports. So I think a lot of performing artists hope that you'll treat them like a fine control musical athlete kind of thing. Like look at their instrument, try and understand what they're doing when they're playing, and come up with some kind of really, I guess, individually crafted solutions that help them get back to playing. Um, and in that experience, I was invited on my first tour with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra. And it was interesting to me because I traveled with them for a month through Europe. My job was to keep them on stage. And what was interesting to me is how naive they were about how to use their bodies and certainly psychological processes as well. But at this case, just talking about physical stuff. And I was like, gosh, I had this injury and it for sure it had quite an impact on me, maybe subconscious. I can't believe you guys aren't getting protected against these kind of things or you don't know about these things. It was phenomenal to me coming from the world of sports. So I was so fascinated. And my idea was at that point, well, why aren't we doing the same? Why aren't we really studying musicians? I mean, clearly playing music's very different to sport, but the similarities are it's a lot of practice, it's a lot of repetition. In music, yeah, I mean, in things like sport, you can have really fine skills on things like how you hold a baseball, for example, combined with all the throwing and the other big, more power muscle stuff. But the concepts of using muscles, the right amount, in the right timing, in the right way, kind of holds true for music too, not just for sport. So there are ways we should be looking at it. And yeah, so I think what my injury did was really made me sympathetic to this, thinking, wow, like, how come you guys aren't getting protected against the kind of injuries you're getting? The things I was saying, I feel like we should be able to prevent a lot of this if you were given the knowledge and the tools to do it. And I'd started looking for information and couldn't find anything at that time. There was nothing written about. Before I went on my first tour, I thought, oh, what do physios do with musicians? And went to, whatever referencing them in Google's around them, but libraries, everything. Thought, okay, no idea. Just take everything, keep open-minded and do my best. So, yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned your time with the athletes. I started out as an athlete before a musician.
Yeah.
Obviously, as a practicing athlete, not a researcher. But I'm curious on what you saw. What are the main differences that you saw or have seen between how athletes treat injury and injury prevention, injury recovery, versus how musicians view it? You're kind of alluding to it, but I think we could go a little deeper into that because I feel like that'll be really helpful for musicians to see.
It almost comes down to one word, and that is stigma. Unfortunately, when musicians they're struggling with some kind of issue, whether it's physical or psychological, they feel very anxious that they're the only one who has it, or if someone else finds out, they'll be regarded as inferior in some way. I mean, I've heard so many times musicians say, oh, they've got an elbow problem, but I always thought they had a bad bowing technique or something like this. And I think, wow, guys, you're professional musicians. None of you are bad. Let's face it. You just do something that's highly repetitive. And sometimes it can be in combination with everyday life. We've done other activities that also work the muscles. But I would say in that sense, musicians hide their injuries not just from their other musicians, but often they don't go and seek help, like from a medical
Right.
person. Some of it's been our fault, like some of it's been a fault of health professionals not standing in the musician's shoes enough. I think it's really important for me as a physiotherapist to really understand what the musician needs. It's not about me coming up with a cookie cutter, you're a trumpeter here, do X, Y, Z. We have to really understand what the person needs. In sport, having an injury, they can still sometimes hide it, particularly if you're, say in the reserve grade and want to get into the top league or something. They can hide it, but it's much more seen as a natural consequence of pushing your body to the limits, that from time to time you will have an injury, get it managed early, get rid of it, get on with your life, so to speak. With the musicians, they often hide injuries. They stay there for a long time, become quite chronic, and they get much harder to get rid of. Injuries, the earlier you get onto them, the quicker they'll go as a general rule.
Yeah, just and I've had this discussion with a lot of my guests, and I'm fascinated by it because it just seems like for some reason we as musicians don't take a ton of stock in just this whole idea of longevity
Hmm.
and as a principle of our career and our health and musicianship, and also that that I feel like I've seen athletes just take a little bit more stock and investment in the preventative measures and thinking, okay, so yes, injury is just kind of a nature, what do they call it, like a occupational hazard, right? Of what I do. So I got to take the measures to take care of my body. I mean, you think of elite athletes like Michael Phelps. I've heard of him talk about sleep probably more than any person on this planet. And these other types of things that have to do with our physical, mental, and social well-being, what have you. And one of the goals that I have of this podcast is kind of give people a wake-up call without having to go through an injury,
Right.
to learn these lessons. Do you feel like you've seen a starting of a shift in your time being primarily a musician's health researcher in the stigma behind it, or are we still kind
Yeah,
of stuck in the
so
mud?
I think it's a little bit country dependent, and I think the ball is rolling in the right direction. So when I used to talk to orchestras back here when I was super enthusiastic and kind of really wanting to change the world in a day kind of thing, and you would see the professional musicians sitting back with their arms crossed like, "Man, what's a physio telling us what to do for?" And it's not like that anymore. They come up, "Oh, hey, Bronnie, how are you? I just want to ask you a quick question about this new shoulder rest I've got," or whatever, and they can see that you're just wanting to help them do what they do, but it's stretched me in ways I never thought were possible too, like trying to figure out these issues that musicians would have without any guidelines. I mean, being an anatomist as well has been very helpful because from first principles, we can sort of rebuild and really analyze what's going on sometimes in these complicated issues, like, for example, embouchure. Um, but I think that what you were talking about before with the whole picture, one thing, because I have toured like not only with Sydney Symphony, New Zealand Symphony, mostly Australian Chamber Orchestra, actually touring a lot. And these musicians are incredible what they do. They're really on the road, off the plane. You have one day and then bang, you're into concert night after night. It's sort of play a gig, sleep, get on a bus, go somewhere else, play a gig, sleep, get on a bus, go somewhere else. Like often time zone changes. And, remember in Australia, we don't have a time zone that's very friendly for most
That's true.
places. I mean, so one thing I thought that was really interesting was the problem with sleep. Like they don't get given the time to get over jet lag. Orchestras that tour a lot, like Australian Chamber Orchestra, are quite aware of this. So they try and sleep wherever they can in the early stages of a tour. If you look around a bus or plane, everyone will be there with a neck cushion, hopefully, if I've nagged them enough. Zonked out, just trying to keep enough sleep hours in the bank. So sleep is crucial. Also, regular snacks and hydration. One thing, I
Hmm.
did a big national orchestra study here of all the major state symphony orchestras, um, opera, ballet, symphony. And one of the things we found is that musicians play too dehydrated, which was a very shocking finding for the simple reason that your blood is 70% water, and blood's what brings nutrients to your muscles to give you energy. So playing dehydrated is a big no-no. One of the issues this then led me to is why? Why are people playing dehydrated? And a lot of it's due to rehearsal structure. I'm quite
Wow.
frustrated by this because it seems a simple thing. So in universities, professional orchestras, over here it's normally an hour 40, an hour and 40 minutes for the first rehearsal. Then you have a break and you come back for 40 minutes, something like this. There's slight tweaks and variations, but roughly this. And so people don't want to have to go to the bathroom during the rehearsal, so they make sure they don't drink too much water, so they don't. No, but seriously, it was.
I
So
can see that. Yeah.
yeah, and I don't know whether it's conscious or subconscious, but I ran a trial. I headed up or developed a program at our National Academy of Music, a musicians' health and performance support program, and in that I got them, and they had a few very cooperative conductors too. And I said, look, can we just try breaking it into 3 practice sessions instead of this mega practice and next practice, so that you have to calculate these things quite closely, but so that we had 3 shorter sessions with 2 shorter breaks rather than really longer break, other practice. And it's funny, I talked to the musicians afterwards, interviewed them afterwards, because I thought, oh, they must be feeling like they don't get as tired because um, there's other reasons why, like normally muscles are going to fatigue, once you get to 60 minutes, once you go beyond that, they're going to fatigue. So it was always to me mind blowing that practice sessions were so long. It just makes no sense physiologically. Um, but I talked to the guys after we'd had these shorter sessions, thinking they'd say, oh yeah, I didn't feel as tight in my muscles and things, which for sure they didn't feel as tired. But the biggest thing, they all said it was so great to be able to drink water and to have toilet break. I mean, this is all they talked about, like the fact they could actually have a snack and rehydrate. And I thought that was quite profound that, really this is such a fundamental thing. Like athletes would never be exercising dehydrated and without adequate nutrition. And musicians often, the nutrition, some of them are really struggling financially and just not necessarily knowing how they can manage a good diet in an economical way. And at our National Academy, we'd sort of set up a menu sharing and food sharing kind of
Oh, cool.
system so people could try and um, come up with better nutrition alternatives. Some of the kids had never been out of home, didn't know how to cook. So there was all sorts of things we could do to get them to try and build in more breaks so they could go to the bathroom and have a top-up snack. And just talk about what kind of food will fuel your muscles through the day, because it's just such a fundamental thing. It's like putting petrol in your car, or electric charge maybe now, but if we don't have that, it's going to run out of steam.
Totally. Thank you for sharing that. I'm thinking about hydration a lot more these days, but I hadn't realized that there have been studies done with musicians there. So I think that'll be really valuable for the audience. I kind of want to pivot to something that we have talked extensively about in our consultations together. So as you have spent the time with musicians, helping them rehabilitate from their injuries from a physical standpoint, how important to their physical recovery have you seen mental rehabilitation to be, whether that's seeing like a psychotherapist for clinical depression or anxiety, or just like the crap that goes on in your head when you're going through an injury, how important do those things need to be, or how critical to physical rehabilitation is the mental side of the game?
And look, they're absolutely entwined. I mean, we have this Cartesian dualism, you'll hear this called, this kind of tendency to separate mind and body, which there's historical reasons why that kind of happened in medicine. There's a big swing back towards the whole person in medicine as a whole. Like, I think this is a great sign. But I work often with psychologists, and we did a study looking at pain sensitivity and severity of pain in musicians, and correlated that with how much music performance anxiety they had, and it was strongly correlated. So
Wow.
you were much more anxious if you had more pain, and whether the pain was making you anxious or because you were so anxious, you were developing this kind of um, trigger point tension in your muscles was a really interesting finding. So yeah, we've got empirical data saying yes, they can very much be related. So you have to look at both sides of the person when you're dealing with physical problems. For sure, there's often a mental component. I mean, so we know that, and that was with kind of more substantial pain problems. It was much clearer the connection. So
Yeah.
like we sort of rate them out of 10, like, so the more severe pain nearly always was related with a higher level of anxiety.
Interesting. What type of modalities? I don't know if you covered that in your study, but in that particular study, but what type of modalities did you see to be most effective for the mental rehabilitation? Because I know we've talked about like neurolinguistic programming. I'm working with somebody right now that you referred me to with that, and I'm working on that for my own coaching as well. So there's like that side of things, but then there's also like the traditional, I guess, psychotherapeutic route. Have you seen one or the other to be more prominent or
So
more helpful? I don't know. Hey guys, I just want to interrupt the show real quick and just tell you about something I've been working on for a long time that I'm so excited to share with you. Like I've said in the past, you have the potential to make your injury become a benefit to you, an asset to you. But at the same time, I know the feeling of being lost, not knowing who to turn to, where to go, what resources to use, all sorts of things, and also how to reframe the situation, the mental skills that's needed to be able to do that. And so if you are one of those people looking for that resource, that help, that coaching, I want to tell you about something I've been working on, and that is Musician Unchained. Musician Unchained is now the newest coaching platform for musicians going through injury. It is intended to help you view your situation in a way that benefits you and make the changes in your life that you need to become the best version of yourself because of your injury. Your injury being the impetus for that change. I would love to be able to help you in any way that I can, even if that means sending you somewhere else to someone who can better help you. And so if you are interested in working together one-on-one, visit our website, musicianunchained.com/let's hang for more details. All right, let's get back to the show.
well, in psychology, like, I think assuming we're working at the same time, so they know the injury is manageable, it just needs X, Y, Z, then at the same time to build up that confidence if they need that to return to play or to actually rehabilitate trauma. They're quite different things. So when you look at psychology, you would have heard in sports of performance psychology. So this is when you give someone a whole set of mental skills to help them get through a performance. And it's sort of like a very well-known musician friend of mine said, it's like when you have mental skills, it's like a whole bunch of cards in your pocket so that
Absolutely.
if life throws something at you, you've got another card to pull out and you can adapt. So for all musicians, they should be getting some mental skills, and you need to practice them before the moment. You don't want to get on stage
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
say, "Oh, that's right, I was meant to do visualization," and like
Right.
try it for the first time when you're stressed. That's not going to go down so well. So practicing things like mental skills is crucial, even if you have to do these like virtual reality kind of things where you imagine you're in this upcoming concert, or you have these now these studios where you have these artificial concert halls you can play in and things to try and
Oh, cool.
prepare for it. And yeah, it's very cool new technology. But on the other side, you have people who've sometimes had quite sadly trauma through their training, maybe trauma
Right.
associated with playing the instrument, or that they have just had some severe episodes of music performance anxiety or depression or something like that. It could be just something that they suffer from, a genetic thing or something like this. And it's making sure, so for those sort of things, that's when psychotherapy and things like meditation, even positive self-talk, all these things can come in very useful when you really have a problem you need to deal with. And I think if you have something and there is an associated trauma or an event that's occurred that you're really struggling to get over, whether it's personal or musical, you really need professional psychological guidance through that. With mental skills training, it's a bit different. You're trying to get tools in your toolkit, and so there might be things like NLP. A lot of people find mindfulness quite helpful so that you can look at your short-term gains and still be constructive and positive instead of always saying, "Oh, I'm not there yet," and kind of having this feeling of failure where you're really doing well and you're improving. You just need to sort of have more realistic goal setting and things. So there's a lot of mental skills that can be taught to musicians, and that's a different pathway, as I said, from people who've really suffered trauma. And as one example with the orchestra study I was talking about before, one very interesting finding we had as we analyzed their we did this big physical and psychological survey and a physical examination of all the musicians. But with the psychological survey, what we found is that, I mean, to be fair, a lot of the experienced musicians were trying to use positive self-talk and meditation and some strategies like this. Um, Quite a lot, as we see across the board, we're talking about using beta blockers, and yet very few of them had seen a doctor or psychologist or psychiatrist from them. There seemed to be a bit of passing it around in the green room kind of thing. And
Right.
the problem with that was what we also found was that a lot of people who thought they had anxiety, actually, if you look at all these scales, so the way you use surveys can sort of help indicate what kind of mental health issue might be affecting you if that's there. And a lot of the people who perceived they had music performance anxiety and were taking beta blockers actually really seemed to clearly have depression problems. And the problem
Interesting.
is beta blockers are essentially kind of a depressant. So you're depressed and you're taking a depressant, so so you won't get the outcome you're looking for there. And so I think the big thing that came out of that was saying, guys, if you're feeling you're struggling, please don't feel alone. Go and see a professional who can
Sure.
really guide you in the right direction, because it's not going to mirror. It's not always the same pathway you'll need to take.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's that's another through line I think I see with athletes and musicians is, or a through line I'd like to see, I guess, is the a lot of, at least what I see as an emerging field in sports psychology, is this like mindset coaching,
Uh-huh,
the
uh-huh,
peak performance type of stuff,
uh-huh.
and I feel like we want to get there as musicians,
Yeah.
but it's taking a little bit to get that ball rolling.
But I think there's like three different things in a way. Like there's the health professionals where if you have an injury or really you're struggling with anxiety or other mental health problems, or like you've got tinnitus, you've got ringing in your ears, this is the time to see a health professional just to get a clear idea of what's going wrong. And then you as the musician can make some informed choices about what you then want to do to manage it. Like first step is really knowing what's wrong. And, even if you love your music teacher and, the guy who sits next to you in a section's the best, they still are not trained necessarily in diagnosing what's wrong. Um, but once you have that diagnosis, then the choice of how you manage these pathways is um, very helpful, because often you can do things like there's a lot of methods in that musicians study, like, you have Feldenkrais or Alexander
Right.
technique or body mapping, or there's a whole lot of methods that musicians study. Now, they're not health training per se, they're like movement methods or counseling, mental coaching sort of methods that are all useful, but they're not about a diagnosis. They're about giving you some strategies, right? But you should, if you've had something that's more a substantial lingering problem of some kind, you should really get a clarity on what it is. And then you'll feel a bit more strong in choosing the pathways you choose to get back. So I say we have the multidisciplinary kind of health team. And then you have this kind of, I usually call them performance support team, for want of a better word. I sort of say, you have the health team, the performance support team, that would be your coaches, like this kind of NLP or whatever it is, the various kinds of fantastic sort of music coaching are starting to come through, as well as the body coaching or teachers, like from all those body methods. And then we have the music teachers, your colleagues, this sort of thing where, what I've been doing with things like the Embaucher Project and always in conversations with orchestras saying, yeah, the stats tell us that most musicians will have an issue from time to time. So be nice to each other. I mean,
Yeah.
like
Amen to
it's
that.
that simple. Really, I think that's the important thing, because positive support during times that are tough makes a big difference to your recovery.
Absolutely. I read a study in sports psychology that said that the perceived support actually goes farther than the actual reception
Mhm.
of support, just from a
Absolutely.
mental, psychological
Absolutely.
standpoint. Keeping on this thing with the psychology or neurology, I guess this next question would be something we've also talked about quite extensively. And I already know the answer to this question. I'll preface it
Oh.
with that. But is pain all in our head?
Well, I'll tell you what, we'll do a swap now. If you hand me your pain and show it in front of the camera, I'll show mine.
What's that?
Show me your pain in front of the camera and I'll show you mine. Like
That's you
you
can't
can't
show it.
show,
Yeah.
yeah, right? Of course it's in your head, but it doesn't mean it's not there. It just means the brain's a powerful organ that interprets sensations and feelings and even anxiety and all sorts of things can give a perception of pain. It doesn't mean that you don't have a real injury, and I think that's got to be clear. It's just that many, many things can lead to pain, like fear of pain makes pain worse. There's all sorts of really interesting things like this. A friend of mine, Lorimer Mosley, is a wonderful pain scientist and has created a lot of resources for anyone going through pain. If you look up Lorimer Mosley, you'll see a million pages of things. But he has, they're fantastic at coming up with various acronyms, but he has this tool he calls the protectometer, and he calls it dim sims is the process. So the danger in me and safety in me attitudes towards various aspects of your life that kind of feed into this pain system. And it's really fantastic because instead of looking at something and think, oh, I'm worried about that, I'm not sure, and seeing all the danger around you, you try and identify the safety instead and start thinking, oh, yes, I think I should be able to manage that, or I can see that that's possible for me to do. And so you try and build up the safety um, aspects. So, I mean, one example you could give in movement, I had a singer who had a back problem. And when she came in, she was so disabled because her whole back she was holding very rigid. She could barely move. And really, we worked a lot on getting her just to kind of get a bit stronger and protect the spot that she was having problems with, but move normally elsewhere. And it made a huge difference just not to be, like to try and find the safety she had through her body and let that kind of emerge. And if she felt she needed to protect the spot that was worrisome, well, that's okay, but you don't want it to stop you doing everything. So this protectometer, or looking at the danger in your situation and being aware if you look at the negatives. And I mean, I would say practice, ironically, is kind of a good example of a bad perspective often in music is you get to your end of the practice session and you go, well, that was terrible. Instead of saying, well, 95% was really good and I did all these things and just 5% I didn't kind of get quite what I wanted. And, there's a lot of research in sports medicine. Again, really interesting research on how to enhance motor skills in training. And, one of the really important things is looking at the positives of it. That should be the first thing you do, is that you practice and you identify what you did well, before you start looking at what didn't go so well. Because what I find astounding is that I would say to people, practice includes physical and mental skills. If that's what you need, it should be part of your allocated practice time if that's the thing that's holding you back. put time into it. You can't just hope it'll magically disappear. You have to work on it like anything else. But with your musical skills, the same thing, set your practice goals or whatever. We know for sure that when you practice, you should pre-evaluate, do what you do, then post-evaluate. And I find it's quite common for people to be doing mindless practice, like spending hours on their instrument without really um, doing what we call, I guess, from old studies again in musicians, actually, this deliberate practice. This
Right.
concept that you really um, practice for a reason, not just hours on the instrument.
Yeah, one of the things that I have noticed in my own journey and questions that other people have asked me is when it comes to identifying pain, and really like this is kind of the stage I'm in right now in my recovery, but identifying what pain is the brain being hypersensitive and what pain is like what we should be paying attention to is like, okay, this is, I've gone too far, possible damage has been done. And now this is obviously something that like everyone should consult their personal physicians about, right? But also like what are some hallmarks of pain
Okay.
that's like, the stuff that I'm experiencing where it's just hyperactivity of the nerves of the pain receptors versus there's actual damage being done, please stop type of thing.
Yeah. Sorry, I deviated a bit from your question before.
No, you're
Yeah.
good. You're good.
um, so one thing we should see with um, pain, if you have played a lot the day before and the next day you think, oh, I'm feeling a bit sore, you might think, well, means that I've overloaded the muscles. There's lots of little strains in the muscles. Equate it to going for a 10K run when you haven't run in the last 5 years. That kind of pain is like exercise induced, and it should settle over the next day or two. And that should be the end of it. And in that time, think of it like you have lots of little strains in there and just ease off a little bit so that it recovers faster. I think there's a fear that if you stop, oh, if I don't practice today, I'll fall behind, but you can actually really set yourself back because you didn't let these relatively minor strains heal. So if you can see a reason for your pain, like I played twice as much yesterday and now it feels sore, just imagine that. You've got lots of little sores here and lots of little strains there, and it needs you to ramp back your activity for a day or two. In saying that, usually with minor strains, that should be all you need, and you can start to work back up after a couple of days of relatively lower behavior. And it's quite a quick flip back. If you really feel something go, or you think, oh, I was playing, like you hear this sometimes, something really felt bad. Usually it sounds so simple, and it is. If it's a muscle problem, for example, you can usually stick your finger on it. So if you've done a really noticeable tear, you'll be able to say, that's it. It's there. Um, for us, we can even feel the break in the muscle tissue a little bit
Mm,
if that's the case. So those pains are kind of more the muscle side of pain. When you have nerve pain's quite common in musicians, and it's much more the sharp, the burning, the pins and needles, the numb. It's kind of a very, I guess, in that electrical sort of sense, like nerves operate, it's sort of a shocking sort of pain in some way or another. Now, these pains are, there's a number of reasons. I think very simply, nerves don't like to be squashed or stretched. And if we're in a position where we do that, we can start to get pain. Um, those problems should settle if we get out of the position and let the nerve settle. Often people don't. They keep trying to play on. Someone will say, "Oh yeah, I had pain. I kept playing," like this sort of no pain, no gain stuff. That's honestly just a bit silly. Um, some pains, as I said, like the muscle workout pain. you can get back to quickly. But what you should see is a reason for it that's clear. If you're getting a nerve pain that happened because, let's say, your muscles got tired, if we just go back to the face for a second, because one of my favorite areas, a lot of people get lip pain at the front here, and the nerve to your lip runs down like this from sort of here, basically. You've got like a mustache nerve going down like that. If you get tired, your muscle kind of thins and spreads, and you've got a mouthpiece pushing in it. The nerve's going to be really, really upset then, because it's kind of getting a stretch and pressure, and then you get all this noxious stimuli. And if you don't rest, let the muscle recover, get some normal sensation back, then the nerve itself gets irritated. So nerve pain tells you that it's, as I said, it's burning, sharp, numbness, pins and needles is kind of very, they're not usually dull aches and things like that. And that's, we're sort of working on the brain a little bit there, like it's saying panic, panic to the brain. And what you'll do, if you try to keep playing with a pain like that, you'll compensate. Your brain will say, no way, danger, there's a problem there. We'll swap and use another muscle. So then you start playing differently without even knowing you did,
Right.
because you're protecting it. So you just say, think about what you did with the pain. Did you do something where you kind of deserved it, like you painted the roof the whole day before and then you went in and played some concert where, you were using the same muscles all the time? Think, right, that was a bit silly. I back off a bit, ease off, try and do, in sports, we talk where people have like these Epsom salt baths and things like this. There are some good old fashioned strategies to try and get things moving. The main thing is just to have a period of unloading, just a period where you reduce the load to let the tissues heal. And I usually equate this, it's kind of a gross analogy, but you'll get it, to like, muscles don't have a lot of nerves in them, because otherwise every time you'd contract, you'd be like in screaming pain with nerves getting squashed everywhere. So the nerve kind of goes to bundles of muscles, not every muscle fiber. But I always equate it to, so when you strain lots of little muscle fibers, you can't really tell. It's just like a bit sore, feels a bit funny, like as I said before, with the long run after you haven't run for a while. I always equate it to skin though. When we see a scratch on the skin, right? Do we keep like doing things like this and the blood keeps, spurting out, the wound never heals? But this is what a lot of people do when it's a muscle problem. I keep saying, think of it like you've got a knife, you've scratched the muscle across like this. Think of it like it's on your skin. Don't just kind of tug at it. Let it scar up and heal, and then you can start moving it again, because we kind of want that to happen to get the scarring to go away. So we don't want ignoring it, but we also don't want extreme rest. People who say, oh, my arm was sore, so I rested for 3 months. I think, what for? I mean, really, it's doing nothing does nothing. So we would only have a really long rest if you were given strong advice as to why you had to do that, like you ruptured a tendon and they've repaired it or something. And it's very rare that you need to stop for months on end. This is very uncommon.
Gotcha.
So
No,
it's a bit of a roundabout way with pain.
No,
it's such a
seriously.
A good pain and bad pain. I think people have fear of pain. I think about it. Did you deserve it? Did you do a lot? Therefore, it's just sore because you worked it. You can equate it to anything else. You do a lot.
It takes away that fear. Yeah. The other thing that I'm curious about along those lines is in helping people who are recovering from an injury distinguish those types of pain. How does that help them resolve their fear of re-injury?
Because
as they're going through
you
it,
need to be empowered to take control of it. I usually say to people, what you'll notice if you're starting to get to the point where your muscle's tired, like, I think it's very important we recognize fatigue signs, because this kind of is often a precursor to these kinds of pain, if you like, that people don't stop when they should stop. Like, I often reflect on this listening to orchestras rehearse. You think, especially with these hour 40-minute, like, I'm not kidding. I think you get to like maybe an hour 20 and it all starts to sound worse, because everyone's tired, like mentally, physically tired. And you think, why do we do this? It's like putting the tissues at risk. It's mentally, your concentration span doesn't last much longer than 45, 50 minutes. I mean, I think what people need to do is be aware of fatigue signs. So firstly, mostly this kind of 45 minutes up to a max of 60 minutes is about how long our endurance muscles go for. It's like face and finger muscles need a lot of oxygen to work, good blood supply, water, um, to work well, but they can go a little bit longer. Some of our big muscles, like shoulder muscles and things, they get tired much quicker. So it will change a bit according to what you're playing as to how much load you put on your muscles. And we've looked at that. Like in trumpet players, for example, there's at least twice the amount of stress on the lip muscles in certain pieces than others. In a very simple kind of muscle maths equation, that means you can only practice half as much for that piece. You need more breaks, more recovery time, different kinds of ways the muscles work. So being aware of fatigue can help prevent strain. And I often say things like you'll notice you start fidgeting, you're sort of fidgeting around, moving a little bit, starting to try and find different spots on your face to put a mouthpiece. You'll
Yeah.
sort of notice these sort of odd fidgeting things. And I think this is the time, especially if you're in practice, to reflect on, hang on a minute, like, how am I actually feeling? And be attuned that your muscles and brain start to generally fade at the same time. You're not actually kind of as in there with the music as you were, or things, your arms feeling heavier or your tongue's feeling less responsive or something like this. These are fatigue signs, and there's nothing. So the only reason we play to fatigue, so when we push the fatigue boundary, it's to get fitter, right? So if you're trying to build up your playing, you want to always play to fatigue because it kind of stimulates more muscles to respond. But you always want to just bump the edge of fatigue and then stop, rest, and refuel. When you fatigue, the first thing you should do is stop, change position, like unload the muscles, have some water and a snack, because your body, when your muscles are burnt through all that energy, they're like bits of blotting paper. They just want more energy to absorb. So it's such an important time to have a snack that can refuel them to get some more glycogen into your system.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Thank you so much for going into that part. I mean, that's one of the biggest questions I've always had since my injury is like, how do I understand the whole process of navigating the pain of coming back, like the physical or psychological, physical, all that.
With pain though, if you do the safety and go to the edge you feel comfortable with, and then stop and reflect and, just sort of can kind of keep setting these benchmarks, but look at but try and analyze it in terms of what you played, what you did, how long it was. Other things might affect it, you might just be tired or
Right.
might have had other things that are causing some kind of stress. But intensity-based practice is often a good way to avoid, like, thinking about, if I'm playing something twice as hard, I probably have to practice half as long, and then
Yeah.
have a break. Don't just practice for an hour because you booked the practice room for an hour. It can be really useful to do three lots of 20 minutes, or not three lots of 15 minutes within that hour, and have a 5-minute break between them where you just have a snack and water and let everything just rejuvenate a bit.
Right. That rest. So Gabe Bradford and I were talking about that the importance of that rest period. Yeah. I'm reading a book actually that he recommended called The Talent Code, where it's talking about how that actually does a lot. The rest time does a lot for the retention of what you're practicing. So it's a worthy investment, physically and mentally.
Right. You want to stop at the top. There's like, sorry, very Australian word here, but oodles of research that says, you want to stop at the top. You want to be doing something really well. So when I'm doing retraining with people, I keep saying, I want your brain to imprint the good stuff, not that you do it 2,000 times because you're a high achiever and somewhere at 1012 it started going downhill, and what your brain's left with at 2,000 is confusion. We don't want that to imprint on your brain. We want the good stuff to go in there.
Right. I want to kind of transition to some things that you as an anatomist and physiotherapist can offer the music practitioners, the public school teachers and the private studio instructors and everything. And I don't know if this is too broad of a question to try and cover we don't have time to cover all the different instruments and all the different cues, but for those who are public school band directors or whatever, from a physiological or an anatomical standpoint, are there any sort of visual or auditory cues that they can look for in their students to be like, oh, this kid needs to take a break, like to precursors to injury type of thing? Hey guys, hope you're enjoying the show. I just wanted to jump in here real quick and tell you about something that I'm really, really excited about. For a while now, I've wanted to create an even more effective resource than just the podcast that injured musicians can go to receive the support that they need. And recently I did just that. So write this down. Trust the Process Podcast Injured Musician Support Group. I know it's a long title. We're still working on that part. But this is a place where people can go now, injured musicians and even musicians who have gone through injury in the past, and people that help musicians go through injury, where they can go to receive the support that they need, whether that be ask questions, share their victories, share their frustrations, and overall just receive the community and the support that they need in a very proactive, intentional way. And so I just ask that you guys support these injured musicians by sharing this group with them, that they can receive the support that they need. Okay, enjoy the rest of the show.
As I said before, I think if they're looking uncomfortable and fidgeting around and like just looking like they're having trouble getting comfortable, that's a. I mean, of course, we have very active kids that might be just fidgets, but I mean, actually looking like they're sort of adjusting everything 200 times. I think just check in on them. Sometimes I honestly think music teachers are really excellent at picking up that something's not quite right, to be honest. But I think if someone's withdrawn or not, their personality is altered a little bit, that maybe something's going on that's affecting them with the mental health side. We often see that people that are normally maybe withdrawing a bit. For me, I think I'm very attuned to the way people look when they play. So often like people I know quite well, I think, why are you playing like that? You know, there's some imprint memory of how people move. So I think if they're clearly doing something different, you think, gosh, why are they, holding the trumpet like that? Or why are they suddenly doing this differently? You should also be asking. They might not be aware. They might have adapted around things without knowing, or they might be working around an injury. So something, you can tell it doesn't look right, doesn't look like the way they normally hold it. And I would also say for music teachers and band directors, like one of the really important things is that when kids come into the practice room, especially when you're at school and they're busy and they may be tired or whatever, please encourage them to, I don't know, jump up and down, run up and down the stairs, have a glass of water, just get something in their system, get the blood moving and get at least some water or a snack in their system, mate. I used to give handouts to all the music teachers and on warm-ups for musicians and just get them to swing their arms, move, get their hands going, have a handful of sultanas or whatever it is, just some fuel before they play so that, they're in a good state to begin with. There's two separate things here, what to look out for and to try and avoid issues within your group.
No, that's the purpose of this show, is to provide resources of any kind to help prevent injury and also help in the recovery from injury.
Well, I think band directors feel this pressure to get an achievement and an outcome. And I mean, there's so much pressure in those jobs to try and get everyone to go well. But I think just to be aware that they're going to be at their best if they're ready to play, not tired and stiff and cranky and whatever else, like getting them to do some warm-up things usually makes them much more responsive in any case.
Right.
It's not lost time.
Right. No, exactly. 100%. With private teachers, what role does anatomical knowledge and physiologically based conversations have in just everyday pedagogy? Because I mean, I've seen classes where their definition of pedagogy is more based in like performance pedagogy or like how to play this piece, like your traditional, like what people would think of like as master classes type of thing. But how can private teachers implement this anatomical knowledge and physiological knowledge into their everyday teaching to help their students stay healthy?
That's actually a project I'm working on right at the moment. We're
Oh,
calling
yeah?
it training sound performance. So we're trying to develop a whole lot of resources for music teachers to help them do exactly what you're saying. We interviewed and surveyed a lot of them from around the world, music educators, often very experienced, very people who have a lot of great stuff to give. And what they said, probably pointed at me mostly, is, you don't have to give them an anatomy textbook worth of knowledge, but just try and explain some foundational things. So, for example, with brass players, like we've talked about, your orbicularis, the muscle that sort of
Yeah.
does that, is really the foundation that everything hangs off. And if that's not engaged first, then the person can have all sorts of problems. So just some really simple things, like some things off the instrument that I would say again can be useful, almost used in an instrument warm-up sense, that get muscles activating, but you can see the use of it in playing. So I think they need to understand some basic concepts, like what's the core of the movement. Very often movement comes from the center outwards. So, maybe you're trying to solve a problem with what's happening with the fingers, but actually their shoulder or something's in the wrong position, and all they're looking at's their fingers. And we can't work from the fingers backward to the arm. Like you can't have your fingers pull your arm up and down a piano keyboard or something. This is just not going to be a sustainable action. Your arm has to move so that your fingers can be free to produce the dynamic. So I think we see this a lot. I see this a lot, that the mechanics of the movement are reversed. So the really simple thing is making sure that their postural position is such that they can move from the center outwards. It's a very foundational
Interesting.
anatomical, kinetic,
Yeah.
biomechanical concept. And I think this sounds strange, but the other thing I would say to teachers is, if you always have your lesson with your students standing, that they go and sit and playing in a community orchestra or something, please give them a lesson now and then in sitting as well, because often you don't realize that they don't know how to sit. I mean, this happens time and time again with the tertiary teachers, for example. They always give their lessons in standing, and I'm looking at this student in orchestra and saying, I think you need to give them a lesson in sitting as well, because they don't know how to
Interesting.
sit.
Yeah.
I mean, I work on them with posture, but I think it's helpful to get that reinforcement and both people work in it. So I guess those are the simple things. You have to move from the center outwards. You have to really ground your posture. Like, think of how you're putting your feet, how your pelvis is on the seat. You don't want to be perching on the edges of chairs, because then everyone's like super stiff and uptight from the get-go.
Oh,
I don't
that's
know.
a little controversial from what I've heard. Imagine that.
No, perching's a big no-no. Because I think people, without knowing it, they think, oh, if they perch, they'll have to be upright. But it's like, it's so unstable for the body, right? Like it just means that you're anchored in two-dimensional space then, because if you go forward, those bones in your pelvis are going to shoot you off the edge of the stairs. So you've got to have off the chair, sorry. So you're going to have your feet bracing, your pelvis there. It means that you play above the pelvis. So one of the problems we have is if your pelvis is not grounded properly, and usually I say to people, you sort of have to stick your bottom out as you sit down. So you imagine kind of your, pubic area is like the center of an X of support. And at the back of the X, you sort of can feel the back of what a lot of people call these sits bones, or, anatomically we call them ischial tuberosities. Just doesn't seem to take off as much as sits bones. Anyway,
Can't put that on a bumper sticker.
Yeah, exactly. But then at the front of your X, so the middle part's like your perineal area, again, anatomy, but kind of your pubic area. And then at the front is like your thighs or your feet, or where you perceive that forward part of your movement. And if you land your pelvis this way, you can relax your back muscles. And when you move, you're moving underneath your pelvis, thighs. You're sort of moving from outside of one thigh, outside of another, to the front of your thighs, back to those sits bones, and you have all this movement that's actually kind of sway, if you like. So if we have balanced position where we can sway, that's kind of a free movement. There's not a lot of effort in swaying, and it gets us to where we need to go without, if you're sitting perched at the edge of the chair, you're going to always be kind of pushing and straining above because you're actually locking down to try and stop yourself sliding off the chair. And I'm very convinced of this after many years of working. Like, you can be close to the front of the edge of the chair, but you can't be
On the
this
edge.
on the edge. It's just really unstable. And um, one of the problems that happens if you're that unstable and you have to use your feet to lock yourself down and anchor, and as I said, you tend to not move three-dimensionally, as it puts so much more workload through the upper body. And one
Yeah.
of the things it does is it tends to make people breath hold because so you see this all the time, and sorry, I'm going to pick on people here, but like violin, viola, piano players, where they're like kind of breath holding because they're moving their body like in two halves, like the bottom half's doing goodness knows what, and the top half's over here. And this is really hard for the body to manage, rather than this kind of idea that you sway to get your arms on the keyboard instead of being this kind of very exertional sort of C-shaped movement and things. So this is a very fundamental thing. Your pelvis should be all on the chair, even if it's at the front of it. Sometimes it doesn't hurt to use back support for some of the instruments, like trombone and things like this. It can be helpful, but sometimes it's not helpful. Sometimes you need to be forward to kind of reach. But being in a position when you land your pelvis this way, that you have this X of support underneath, usually means you can go back, you can go forward, and it's just sway under your hips and legs. This is super important for every instrument. So because it stops the breath holding, it takes a lot of load on the upper body, and people have a misconception that if they allow sway or people use their feet, they'll move more, but they look like they move less because it's a very fluid movement. So it's just this bit of give in the system instead of this kind of like always
Laborious thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a kind of general tip for
No,
every studio teacher. Warm your kids up, sit on your pelvis properly.
Yeah, no, seriously, that's a first on Trust the Process, talking about sitting. Well, I think, and another thing that you had said, actually with Frankie on the Amisher Project podcast, which everyone needs to go see. Brass musicians, you don't have a choice; you just need to go see it. Sorry, actually, I'm not sorry. And
you haven't seen the latest. I've painted his face, and we're really doing a run through of all the muscles.
Oh, really?
That's coming soon.
Oh, good, good. So with that though, like the strength building exercises and like these more anatomical, physiological, conscious activities, I think you had said with him that the goal is to be building strength so you're not using 100% of your muscle strength, because we think, at least I thought when I first started working with you, that building up all this strength was I'm going to be using 100% of it, but the goal is to build up your strength so that same amount of energy and I guess I don't know what to call it, but like
we call it efficiency and like sports science, which is musicians hate this term, and I get it. There's nothing mechanistic about playing an instrument, but basically what it means is that if you have more control and more strength, then you don't have to work as hard when you play. It's
right,
as simple as that. There's also the type of strengthening you do. So you don't want to work muscles that you're already using all the time when you're playing in the same way. So being on many tours with orchestras and things, you'll have a bus full of buzzers at the back, everyone on their mouthpiece buzzing madly. And I'd say to them, guys, why don't you do, other face exercises off the instrument? Give your lips a bit of a rest from pressing a beat of brass into them, and, everyone's a bit scared about the concept of it. And one thing we know for sure is that cross-training is a good thing. It's like, so for example, with the face and fingers, these are areas where we have a lot of muscles that can do fine control activities. And ironically, often when people have problems, they're not using fine control, they're using like everything in these areas where actually they
Yeah.
should be. It's much more about dexterity in the face and the fingers, for example. And that requires you to really have a good flow of movement, again, sort of from the center up, but also to be in touch with the muscles so that you can kind of recruit just what you need for the job. So there's two things. One is sort of having your brain have a good idea of where that muscle is and how to find it. So I can do this sort of exercise and I think, right, so when I'm doing something on a guitar or clarinet or whatever, I know I can move that finger, or that finger will be able to move freely because my brain has a pathway to it. It's not that when you're playing, you're thinking, "Oh, I should move my finger." Like
Right.
you're just creating that pathway for your brain so it can just find it when you're playing. You don't. I think people get worried about doing these things. They have to think and play. Well, no, the idea is that you create better pathways so that when you're playing, it can find them more automatically and quickly. And then the second thing, so one thing's fine control training of these peripheral parts, super important to get that brain very clearly knowing which finger's which, or how to do that versus that or whatever. And then you have the strength thing where with endurance and strength to build that up off the instrument can be good. I find this particularly with the face where people are very vulnerable to injury if there's any increase in load because it's only just strong enough to get through the day, so to speak. So you have these like Star Wars or some of these like commercial pieces they're playing now, and everyone's chopped at the end of it because they don't have any reserve in the tank. They're not really like really for a brass player, for example, coming back. One of the problems you guys have is taking your instrument on holidays, and there's plenty of memes about this kind about
There are
not
plenty of
use
memes
it,
about it.
not losing your chops over the break and stuff. And you think actually you can do facial exercises that will keep your chops in perfect shape
Hmm.
without and just give it a bit of a pause from playing. And it takes some confidence with this, like ironically, some of the people, one of the trumpeters here had a nerve injury and had to be off the instrument for 4 months, and they just couldn't put pressure on it because of the nerve injury. And so they did do all the off instrument sort of face exercises and said when they went back, they could just play. And they said, I've never been off. They just thought they wouldn't be able to play. And so it's fine. I just kept it in such good shape that actually it felt great. And you think, so it's possible. Like, of course, I'm not saying everyone should take 4 months off playing, but, sometimes we need time off. It's like, you've obviously gone through these nerves are tricky things. We've got to try and get the strength up, desensitize, so that they start to feel normal sensation again and things, and that might require less playing. So in the meantime, let's get it nice and strong and get the control nice and refined so that it actually makes everything come together more quickly in the end.
Totally. Totally. Well, Dr. Ackermann, Bronwen,
Mm.
thank you so much for all your expertise and sharing all this knowledge with us today. I just so grateful for you in my own experience and also for being willing to come on the show.
No
Um,
problem. Sorry for all the segues. I'm a very segue-oriented
no,
person.
it's all incredibly valuable. Seriously. I ask a couple of questions at the end of every episode.
Mhm.
And the first one, the whole reason why I have this show is because I was connected to somebody through a podcast that helped me get a piece of knowledge that I needed to get, through my injury. And so if somebody were to come up to you and say that they had found you through Trust the Process, listening to this guy out here in Utah talk to you about injury stuff, what would be one piece of advice that you would give them? No matter what injury or instrument they play.
To give them personally or about the journey that they're on?
Yeah, like they're saying, I'm just going through an injury. What can you tell me?
I think one thing I've often equated this to is that it's like what you're going to hear is a lot of different things from a lot of different people because in music you can hear all sorts of things, and there's people have their perceptions. And I think you need to kind of put it into a filter, like these like flower shakers, and just don't necessarily take it on board. Give it a bit of shake and uh, look at the fine stuff that drops out, and in the sense that you need to filter it. You need to sort of be open, because sometimes things can be surprising. What can be helpful for you, the things you might not have heard of before or experienced before. Be open, but also respect, if you like, um, that some people are well intentioned but don't really understand your injuries. So I I think that's the point when you say, "Thank you for that advice. That's really interesting. Would you like a cup of tea?" Just like
Yeah.
sorry, tea. We drink a lot of tea in Australia, very British.
Yeah.
But just respect that they're coming from a place where hopefully they're well-meaning, but that you don't. A lot of these things will not be appropriate for you. So one of the hard things is this filtering process, but just be aware that that is. I think don't take everything on board, even if someone's the world's best player of your instrument. They're not living in your body and your skin. Their
Right.
advice has elements to it that are useful, but really be prepared to filter and look after yourself that way. And if you need support, then again, we've talked about things like psychological support, whatever. But I think it's quite important when you've heard people like Gabe talk about, once he sort of felt like he understood what he had to do, then he found that he could gather some useful, I guess, bits and pieces from different sources that helped him make his full recovery, but at the same time being careful about things that were not helpful. So you have to be quite a lot of self-reflection, I would say. So be prepared to filter, be very reflective about, and respect your own Bauchgefühl, as they say in German, like your own intuition. Mm.
Definitely. Um, the last question, I'm actually going to call an audible here. But I'm curious, in your tenure as a musician, health researcher, and anatomist and physiotherapist, where you've seen the conversation and the dissemination of information, how it's evolved, but where do you see it going? Like how do we best get this message out there and instilled in the musician community in 2024 going to 2025 now?
I really honestly believe it's through us working with people like you and with the Embaucher Project guys. I think we need the musician. One of the problems I have as a health person is perhaps translating everything into like musical outcomes. So I think moving forward, musicians need to not see health as a disease. They need to see health as a great state of being, and to whatever your background is, um, to aspire to finding this state of what for you is ideal performance and health status. I I would say there's an interesting a guy, Antonovsky, a psychologist from the like 60s, who talked about the curve from ease to disease. Like, some musicians are playing with kind of physical handicaps and still making incredible music, or neurodivergent musicians making amazing music. So we're all on different parts of what people perceive. I know some very famous musicians playing with some quite big challenges in terms of diseases they have, but they're managing it well. And part of this thing is that, you want strategies that wherever you are in the spectrum, however many limbs you have or whatever your status is to have strategies that take you towards a kind of a positive sense of well-being and ease in your performance capacity, if it's a performance capacity you want, and to sort of have strategies to help you move in that constructive direction. I don't know if that's a simple answer, but I think with that process, sometimes in that process you need help from health professionals. Can say you should do this, you shouldn't do that, but musicians might say, "What can I play then?" And
Right.
that's where you need, I think the culture in music really has to change from within. The more and more of you that are talking about this and saying, "Hey guys, we know that most musicians will run into health problems from time to time. Why aren't we constructive and helpful and help each other through it? And some of you doing extra training to provide the support. It's fantastic. So yes, moving forward, I see great possibilities. People like you guys, like you and Steve and the Embouchure Project, and all these people are getting really nice, positive, constructive messages there. It's not, pain is not something to be afraid of. It's not a career-ending thing. It's just something that will need to be managed. And also, like, some injuries are really nasty. It's not your fault. Sometimes things happen, and dealing with where you go to from there, you can always get support in how to do it.
Definitely, 100%. And thanks for giving the shout out. And I know Gabe and Frankie are appreciative of the shout out too. Yeah, I think that's a great place to end it. So to all of you out there in podcast land, thanks for joining us. So grateful you could be here with us. If you have any thoughts about today's episode, shoot me a text with the link below. If you feel so inclined to help the show along with a donation, that is also available to you in the show notes. And we'll be including some of the other resources that Dr. Ackermann has provided to the musician community through her research. And join our newsletter. That way you're not missing any episodes. You get sneak peeks and all that good stuff going forward with this season. And like I always say, keep on keeping on and keep trusting the process. Until next time. Hey, thanks for tuning into this episode of Trust the Process, the official podcast of Musician Unchained, the newest coaching program dedicated to helping musicians navigate and overcome injury. But before you go, I have a few quick ways you can stay connected and support our growing community. First of all, I'd love to hear from you. Shoot me a text with the link below and share your thoughts, questions, or just say hi. You can also check the show out on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. We also would love to see you in our Facebook support group, Trust the Process Podcast Injured Musician Support Group. If you found value in today's episode, consider making a donation to support our mission of empowering musicians worldwide. Every contribution helps us create more content and resources for you. So visit link number 2 below to support the mission. If you decide to donate, I'll send you my newest resource, the Injured Musician Toolkit, which is an ebook designed to give you tools to help you get through your injury. Subscribe to our newsletter to get exclusive insights, tips, sneak previews of episodes, and announcements straight to your inbox. Act now and I will send you a free gift. So sign up at www.musicianunchained.com/newsletter. And if you or someone you know would like to go deeper with me in the topics of injury and mindset, head over back to musicianunchained.com and check out the Let's Hang tab. As always, I want to thank Daniel Baldwin, my audio engineer, and my sister Dana Lovell for her help with the promotional materials. There is no podcast without them. But before I go, I want to tell you how much I deeply appreciate your time and support. You are not alone on this journey. There are musicians and educators out there who need this resource, and we need to get it to them. Together, we are breaking the chain of old habits and thought patterns that don't serve us anymore, and unchaining the potential within ourselves to face each challenge with strength and resilience. So, as I always say, keep on keeping on and keep trusting the process. Until next time.